Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from New York. And here are some of the stories we're watching tonight, starting with a whole bunch of weather nightmares. There are no shortage of them tonight. Extreme weather is still baking the South. A lot of smoke is back to blanketing the Midwest. And all of this happening as wildfires burn out in the West.
We're asking people to continue to stay out of the area. This is an active scene still.
Now, a lot of this bad weather is turning airports into hotels. Some people have no idea how they're ever going to get home.
How are you feeling?
Tired and really stressed, looking for the solutions.
Also coming up tonight, we want to introduce you to two twins who not only survived fleeing the war in Ukraine, but are now getting ready to go off to college.
Our experience not really great, but other people had even worse.
And we start tonight in the West, where despite all the rain there this year, fire season is off to an unpredictable start, and fire crews are battling several wildfires. Right now, hundreds of people are being evacuated from their homes, threatened by a fast-moving brush fire in Scottsdale, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. At least one building has already been lost, and firefighters are worried about more winds coming in. Meanwhile, in California, officials say the juniper fire burned homes and cars in Riverside County. Now, the good news is that fire was contained almost as quickly as it started. People are just now starting to be allowed back into that area. And all of this is on top of those hundreds of thousands of acres burning in Canada and those hazy skies blanketing the major Midwest cities and East Coast cities as well, plus record heat in other parts of the country and lingering travel headaches that are almost everywhere these days. We've got Shaq Brewster, Bill Cairns, Tom Costello all standing by, but we begin with Nyala Charles with that brush fire that's burning close to a lot of homes out in Arizona. Nyala?
Near Scottsdale, Arizona, 2,500 acres of parched land are on fire. The fire line is dangerously close to homes, forcing more than 1,000 people to evacuate.
We raced in the house. I just grabbed a large suitcase and started checking. I knew we each needed one change of clothes, some of my favorite jewelry items, but mostly the pictures and the computer component that holds all the photos, right? And that's it. And we left everything else you can replace. But as long as you have your family, what more do you want?
This one, named the Diamond Fire, is the 9th wildfire in just 5 days, and the biggest. It started Tuesday afternoon. Once the sun came down, the temperature did too, allowing fire crews to make progress quickly.
Crews were very successful overnight. A hotshot crew, along with 2 state hand crews, were able to get around the entire fire.
But still, none of it is contained, and temperatures topping 100 degrees are a threat to that progress.
We may start to see flare-ups within the interior of the fire.
Hundreds of firefighters are on the ground, and air tankers are fighting the flames from above. According to the Fire, Weather, and Avalanche Center, across the West, there are 43 active wildfires.
Just crack that faucet when you rinse, okay?
The rural Arizona community under threat is no stranger to difficulty. Because of a water shortage, they haven't had access to water since January. Another symptom of climate change. The entire area is under a red flag warning due to wind gusts as high as 35 miles per hour and low humidity.
As we start to warm up, as we start to get in that critical fire weather time frame, we could likely start to see that fire activity increase with flames visible and smoke.
The perfect recipe for disaster.
And Nyala Charles joins us now live. Nyala, what's the latest right now from officials in Arizona, and how are conditions looking over the next few days?
Gadi, fire officials just announced that someone caused the fire, but they're still investigating to find out exactly how. Right now, firefighters' biggest threat is as they try to control this fire, it's getting hotter and windier, which means this fire could grow or potentially another one could start. Gadi?
Nyala Charles, thanks so much. Meanwhile, Canadian wildfires are still sending thick smoke over parts of the United States, leaving some of those places with the worst air quality in the world today. Places like Detroit, Milwaukee, and Columbus, where the air quality fell to very unhealthy levels, and Chicago as well. At times, nearly 90 million Americans were at risk for poor air quality. Take a listen.
I can't even see everything like 5 feet past me. And just look everywhere. I can smell smoke Oh my God, it smells like something's on fire. This is in Cleveland, by the way. This is crazy.
And what seems even more crazy is that smoke from these fires has reached as far away as Europe. But NBC's Shaq Brewster is in Chicago, where the smoke really seems to be messing with a lot of people's anxiety out there. Hey, Shaq, how's it going?
Hi there. Well, here in Chicago, we're used to talking about extreme cold or sometimes even extreme heat. But today, one official is describing the condition as extremely poor air quality. You see what it looks like behind me in the downtown area. I'll tell you, being here on the ground, you can also smell the smoke in the air. And we're getting more reports of people feeling the impacts of it. People talking about congestion, coughing, having a hoarse voice. One lung doctor saying that they have been receiving an increase in calls from patients asking about the impact of this air and warning asthma patients that there is a risk for increased ICU admissions if this air quality does not improve. So what's being advised? Well, essentially everyone is being advised to keep their outdoor activity extremely limited. Don't engage in any running, any strenuous activity. If you are one of those high-risk patients, if you're a child, senior, if you have any heart or lung conditions, you're being advised to avoid being outside altogether. Officials also advising this is not a bad time also to throw that mask on. Chicago dealing with that very unhealthy air quality for much of the day. That's a condition that forecasters say will likely improve over the next day or so. But for now, you're hearing the advice to avoid being outside as much as possible as the smoke from those Canadian wildfires continues to make its impact. Back to you.
Shaq Brewster, thanks so much. Now, that heat wave we've been telling you about has basically stretched across the country. As many as 69 million Americans from California to Florida are suffering. In Texas, at least 13 people have died in the last several days because of that heat. In New Orleans, it was around 100 degrees today, but it could still feel as high as 111. Still, one marching band pushed through with rehearsals, but making sure to take frequent water breaks.
Well, technically, this is normal for us. It's a normal New Orleans day. We have a military training background, so it's just like being in the military. So it's just training. It's like boot camp.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now from hot and humid New Orleans. I don't know why you don't look sweaty, but you don't, Sam. So, I mean, talking about those people that were out there practicing with the band, it takes dedication to practice in this heat. What did they tell you? It seemed like everyone was just taking it in stride.
First of all, if you've seen me at all for the last 48 hours, I've been one hot mess, quite literally, Gadi, but I appreciate that compliment.
I mean, a brown shirt, I was going to say, a brown shirt is a very brave decision with that type of heat out there.
I'm a risky man. What can I tell you, Gadi? Let's go back for a second, though, to your original question about this band, which, by the way, is the preeminent marching band in the United States here in New Orleans. It's St. Augustine. It was incredible to watch this today. You're talking about 40 or 50 kids. Their total is like 170 people in this band. But they're out there with military-level precision, Gadi. And every 20 or 30 minutes, they're going off to get drinks and Gatorades, to get shade. In fact, if some of the band members felt like they were getting overheated, the band director was very clear. You're getting off right now, getting that towel over your head and into the shade. So they were certainly taking precautions. Still, though, it is 110 to 115 degrees with a heat index here. So it's hot. And I did ask the band director, I love this guy, how does this work? Is this just normal sort of everyday life in New Orleans? Here's what he said.
Well, it's unavoidable only because we cannot control the weather. But like I said before, this is normal for us. I mean, we in July and August is the hottest months, but it's when we conduct our band practice. So we're used to it in a sense.
You're battle tested.
Battle tested.
They might be used to it, Gadi, but on a more serious note, the National Weather Service has now issued another excessive heat warning, for tomorrow. That's the 7th for New Orleans this year, which breaks their record, which was last year, 5 times, just to give you a sense of how hot and how intense it has been so far.
Wow. Talking about the infrastructure out there, I know that there have been some questions about some of their water infrastructure. How's the city's water infrastructure holding up in these crazy hot times?
So New Orleans is certainly known for having aging infrastructure. It's been a problem for years. This is not related to the weather, however. What ended up happening was there was construction being done on a water main, and the valve broke and brought the pressure too low. So the city had to issue a boil water advisory for about 500 people. Horrible timing, of course, because you have this heat wave going on, and now folks are worried about having clean drinking water in their homes. I did talk to one gentleman who basically said, I'm buying all bottled water in order to brush my teeth and to cook and clean, to do everything right now, not taking any chances. And I spoke with the Homeland Security Director in New Orleans, told him this story, and here's what he said. Interesting, because I did talk to a gentleman today who said he was brushing his teeth with bottled water. You're saying?
I'm saying that's the safe thing to do until tomorrow afternoon when they clear it.
Tomorrow afternoon is the key point here, Gadi, that city officials say they believe they're going to have this back up and running, which is so important because a lot of these folks are on fixed income and cannot afford to go and buy a bunch of water just to try to get through this period right now in crazy heat.
And we're also expecting this heat to last through July 4th, right? There are big events scheduled, the Essence Festival right there in New Orleans. What are the party plans with heat like this?
Hundreds of thousands of people come to Essence every single year in New Orleans. It's a huge deal. That Homeland Security Director said they've dispensed somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 bottles of water. But here's the most important part. They are communicating here on the local level with the federal government, FEMA, and the state, the governor's office, to find out exactly what they need. And as they're keeping close track, New Orleans, of the number of people in their shelters, they will expand or add new shelters as needed, Gadi.
Sam Brock, stay cool out there. Thanks so much, brother.
Thanks, man.
Now let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, the smoke is back. It seems to be making itself very comfortable.
Doesn't want to go anywhere, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, the smoke's just like a cloud. So, you know, what moves the clouds is the wind. And if the wind's not blowing, the smoke doesn't move. And that's what happened today in the Midwest. The air was just stagnant and it's just kind of drifting around. And we need a strong cold front to kick it out. I mean, this is an amazing number of people. You know, often we tell you how many people are, you know, could potentially see severe weather, how many people are in heat advisories or heat warnings. There's now 137 million Americans that are under air quality alerts. So, you know, population is roughly, you know, 350 million people. So this is a huge number. It includes New York City, Philadelphia, D.C., the Raleigh area, Atlanta, Chicago, all of the Midwest. You get the idea here. So where's the smoke going? So as we go throughout this evening, the heaviest, densest smoke has been in between St. Louis, Chicago, into Wisconsin. Talked to anyone in Indiana. I mean, it just smelled like a wildfire the last 2 days in a row. And then that's going to blow through areas of Kentucky. Notice you don't see as much bright white on the map here. This is as we go through tomorrow evening. And if anything, some of the densest smoke is going to be all the way into the south, even into Atlanta, upstate South Carolina. I wouldn't even doubt if some people in the panhandle of Florida have like a little hazy sunset, a little orange sunset, and they're going to be like, what's that from? Is that from smoke from Canada? And yes, it will be. So the air quality, the purple is where it's very unhealthy, not just for, you know, people with respiratory problems, the young or the old. This is for everyone. And this has been all day in areas of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana. And during the day, it's been drifting east. Not fast, just drifting. And the air quality really went downhill in Pennsylvania during the day today, western New York, and even in D.C., some people even said they felt like they could actually smell the smoke in the air.
And the heat? What's going on with the heat? It's
moving, at least.
Good.
Yeah, how many days in a row were we like Texas?
Yeah, it's the same story every day. Yeah. And it's just no relief.
So Texas is kind of getting back to how it should be, but now all the real heat, the dangerous stuff is moving to areas that haven't really experienced it yet. We're talking Memphis to Nashville, all of Mississippi, areas of Alabama. It got very hot in Little Rock today. I mean, it still feels like 114 heat index in the shade. I mean, and it's not going to cool off a lot at night because it's humid and the air is really dense. We'll be lucky to drop out of the 80s and overnight. And that's when it gets dangerous, when you do that day after day, especially if anyone doesn't have air conditioning running. And a lot of people are wondering, how long is it going to stay hot for the holiday weekend? Notice St. Louis, 95 Saturday, 89 sounds good compared to mid to upper 90s. Dallas, you return to where you should be, mid-90s. So a lot of these temperatures as we head towards the 4th are kind of what we should be dealing with. So as we head towards Saturday, as we talk about travel and everything else, heavier rain, some thunderstorms in the Ohio Valley. Still hot throughout the southern half of the country, but it won't be as bad as today and what we already experienced. And by the time we get to Sunday, we'll be watching those storms. And I know it's been such a story at the airports. Everyone wants to know, you know, what can I get my flight? Will I be delayed? And that's the problem with summertime thunderstorms. They're just so hit and miss. And Yeah, the airlines are very cautious nowadays, too.
Very cautious, and not very many pilots or crews to handle those domino effects. Yeah. Bill, thanks so much. And all of this bad weather is really messing up everyone's flights here in the United States. Hopefully not ours. We've got one in an hour here. Over the last few days, thousands of flights have been delayed or canceled, causing massive congestion at airports and leaving a lot of flyers super unhappy. Meanwhile, one group of passengers might be wishing their flight was canceled after it was forced to make an emergency landing after the plane's nose gear failed. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
Frightening moments today on a Delta plane's approach into North Carolina. Passengers braced as Flight 1092 from Atlanta to Charlotte prepared to touch down without a functioning nose landing gear. The inbound crew alerted air traffic control.
We have a nose wheel unsafe indication. We're going to have to go ahead and declare an emergency.
He didn't want to land, and so that kind of was like the first sign of like, oh, something must be pretty wrong.
We didn't know why. We were just circling the airport, and then the pilot came on and let us know that the wheels up under the nose weren't coming down.
The pilots guided the plane onto the runway, landing safely with more than 100 people on board.
No, it was not bad at all.
With no reported injuries, the airline says it is a rare occurrence, and Delta flight crews trained extensively to safely manage through many scenarios. The incident comes on top of days of delays and cancellations set off by severe summer weather.
We've been here for a day and a half. I've been sleeping on this chair, and I have not eaten anything.
They just give us a flight for July 3rd. It's difficult. We just want to go home, take a shower, eat.
But with passenger levels near record numbers despite fewer flights, rescheduling travelers from canceled trips is a challenge. Today, thousands of delays and cancellations ticked up by the minute.
The only chance they had to give me was to fly me out on Saturday, which is too far away.
The airline with the most flights impacted, United. Its Newark hub hit hard. The airline says weather issues made it difficult to get crews into place. Off-duty flight attendants being offered triple pay to pick up open flights and help with the staffing shortages.
This is an understaffed ATC and crumbling infrastructure in aviation, but it is also absolutely poor planning on the part of United management.
The week's travel chaos all leading to what's expected to be a record-breaking Friday, with the TSA predicting 2.8 million travelers.
This is definitely going to press the system. That's going to be our focus, whatever it takes in order to make sure that the airlines are doing their job and that the FAA has the resources that's needed in order to make sure that both staffing-wise and technology-wise, we're moving forward.
That was Tom Costello. Thanks so much, Tom. And we've got much more news headed your way, including what seems like an unprecedented trial. Normally, after a school shooting, the gunman is in court. But in Florida, it's a former deputy who could spend the rest of his life in prison. That story's next, so stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the headlines we're watching tonight. Former NFL player Ryan Mallett has died after drowning at a beach in Destin, Florida. He was pulled unconscious from the water and he later died at the hospital. Now, during his time at the league, he played for the Patriots, the Ravens, and the Texans. Mallett was 35 years old. And 4 more men have been charged for allegedly taking part in the deadliest migrant tragedy ever at the U.S.-Mexico border. 53 migrants, including 8 kids, died after being left in a tractor trailer in the scorching Texas heat almost exactly a year ago. Part of an Amtrak train derailed today in California after hitting a truck. At least 3 of those cars came off the tracks, but luckily none of them flipped over. Now, a few people on the train were hurt, and the driver of the truck was hospitalized. The former police chief in Maryland was given multiple life sentences for setting at least a dozen revenge fires. David Crawford was found guilty of targeting people in a string of arson cases. His victims were all people he felt wronged him in the past, including a chiropractor and his own nephew because he deleted him from Facebook. And there is a new twist in the world of gymnastics. Simone Biles will compete again for the first time since the Tokyo Olympics. That's when she stepped back from the competition to work through some mental health challenges. Now the 4-time gold medalist is going to take the stage at the U.S. Classic in August. Today, we learned that Madonna was in the hospital for a bacterial infection. Her manager posted today on Instagram that she spent several days in the ICU. Now, of course, a source close to Madonna told NBC News that she is out of intensive care and that she is expected to fully recover. The 64-year-old has been delayed in her upcoming shows, and she has delayed those to recover. She was just about to kick off the celebration tour in North America and Europe, all to commemorate her 40-year career. And when there's a school shooting, you expect there to be a trial for the school shooter. But what we're seeing happening right now in Florida is very, very different. A man is on trial for not trying to stop the Parkland shooter as it was happening. Now, a jury just wrapped up day 3 of deliberating whether Scott Peterson, a former school resource officer, should possibly go to prison for what he did not do during that school shooting. That's when a lone gunman killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School back in 2018. State prosecutors say Peterson ignored his training and stayed outside. Here's how he defended himself in an interview with NBC's Savannah Guthrie back in 2018.
Families need to know I didn't get it right, but it wasn't because of some, I don't want to go into that building. I don't want to face somebody in there. It wasn't like that at all.
You weren't scared?
No, there was no time. Things went so fast.
Were you a coward?
Never.
That's what they called you, the coward of Broward County.
I know. I never had a chance. I never thought even for a moment of being scared or a coward because I was just doing things the whole time. It just never, it never entered my mind.
Did you freeze?
No.
Joining us now is NBC's Kathy Park. Kathy, can you bring us up to speed here? How did the trial go? And have we seen any indication as to how the jury might decide here?
Hey, Gadi, good evening to you. Well, the trial lasted roughly 2.5 weeks, and as you can imagine, it was extremely emotional at times because you had former students, staff members, also police officers taking the witness stand and reliving the horrors of that day. And today, as you mentioned, Gadi, wrapped up 3 days of deliberations so far, and really there was no movement with the jury. However, yesterday, members of the jury did have questions about seeing the evidence again, so they requested the password to review the surveillance footage from that day. But today, no questions asked, no movement. So we are going to move on to tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. when the jury is set to come back and reconvene. But throughout this trial, Gadi, prosecutors stressed that Scott Peterson failed as a school resource officer. He stood back when he should have gone in and ran toward the danger. And they showed the surveillance footage during trial. And prosecutors said that he stood outside for more than 40 minutes. However, his attorney, defense, was saying, look, he didn't know where the shots were coming from. And there was added confusion because the communication was poor. And ultimately, the attorney for Peterson said that his client is not a criminal and he is being portrayed as a scapegoat in this tragedy.
So we heard that sound from Savannah Guthrie and Scott during that interview back in 2018. At the time, he had said that there was no time and he didn't freeze. Does that jive with the surveillance video that we were just showing that was showed to the jury?
Yeah, I mean, it was 6 hours of footage and there were different angles, Gadi. And yeah, I mean, you can see him definitely standing outside of that building for an extended period of time. And the defense and, Scott Peterson did not take the stand, but he said all things considered, he did everything that he could. However, that day will haunt him forever. And something to point out, interestingly enough, Gadi, is that he is facing 11 counts, and 7 of those counts are felony child neglect counts. And in the state of Florida, you can only be convicted or found guilty of those charges if you are actually the child's caregiver. So perhaps that is something that the jury is toying with right now. We are on to day 3 in the deliberations.
And he is facing the possibility of life in prison. NBC's Kathy Park, thanks so much. Now, in the opposite of that story, police in Allen, Texas have released body cam footage from a mass shooting at an outlet mall there last month. Now, the video has been edited by the Allen Police Department, and a warning, the video might be disturbing, but it shows just how fast the officer charged forward to engage that shooter. Now, the video starts with an officer reminding some kids to buckle their seatbelts in the car, and then you can hear it That's when the shooting starts. The officer is seen responding immediately. He grabs his rifle from the car. He runs towards the mall, all while telling people to find cover. After 3 minutes of looking, the officer finds the gunman, opens fire, and kills him, ending that shooting spree.
Got him, bro.
Now, the gunman killed 8 people that day, including 3 children. And now to the latest on the subway chokehold that happened in New York City last month. Today, Daniel Penny pleaded not guilty to second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely. NBC's Emily Akeda has more.
Hey there, the 24-year-old Marine veteran Daniel Penny arrived at this lower Manhattan courthouse just before 10 a.m. He looked straightforward, appeared to be stoic throughout the very brief 4-minute-long arraignment, only muttering 2 words, not guilty, in reference to the charges unsealed in Wednesday's court appearance, including criminally negligent homicide and second-degree manslaughter. Wednesday's closely watched court appearance comes nearly 2 months after that incident caught on camera aboard a subway train where you see Daniel Penny holding Jordan Neely in a chokehold that officials later ruled was deadly. Jordan Neely, we know he was homeless. He was a known street performer who had been suffering from mental illness. His legal team speaking outside of the courthouse, and they say any reasonable person, quote, knows choking someone for that long will kill them, vowing that they will continue to fight to achieve justice for the Neely family. But Penny's legal team also exuding confidence around that the jurors in this upcoming trial should see things in their favor, saying the right and duty to defend oneself and others is also on the line in this case. If convicted, Penny could face up to 19 years in jail. The next court appearance is scheduled for October. I'm Emily Ikeda in Lower Manhattan, NBC News.
Emily, thanks so much. And coming up, the NFL is suspending players for gambling. We're going to explain who's in trouble and what the punishment is. But first, you got to see this. A kayaker in Sydney, Australia, thought he was going for a solo ride until a humpback whale showed up underneath. That curious whale followed the kayak in those crystal blue waters off Bondi Beach. Incredible. Could you imagine it just surfacing right next to you? Be right back. And now to the NFL, and a pretty big bombshell today when it comes to gambling. Several players could be suspended for the entire upcoming season for allegedly gambling. Now, according to ESPN, the investigation involves a handful of players, including Indianapolis Colts cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. Earlier this month, Rodgers tweeted he takes full responsibility and that he made an error in judgment. But so far, the NFL is not confirming the suspensions or who the other players involved are or how many there are. But just last week, the league reminded teams and players of its policy on gambling, with one executive saying the sports world has, quote, changed forever because of sports betting. And that's where we're going to bring in James Boyd. He is a staff writer for The Athletic covering the Indianapolis Colts. First off, let's start with exactly what the NFL's policy on gambling says, because it seems like everybody can and a lot of people are betting on the NFL these days.
Yeah, thanks for having me. But to start off, there are 6 main rules for the players themselves. The first one is don't bet on NFL games. Pretty obvious one. Number 2, don't bet at your team facility while traveling for a road game or staying at a team hotel. Number 3 is don't have someone bet for you. Number 4 is don't share team inside information. Number 5 is don't enter a sports book during the NFL playing season. And number 6 is don't play daily fantasy football. Now, we were on a Zoom call last week with NFL reps who basically broke down the rules, the presentations that they give to players, and they seem pretty straightforward. There are some gray areas there. For example, if you have people at your house and you're an NFL player and they place a bet on an NFL game, the NFL might reach out to a player to verify who made the specific bet. However, the rules that the players continue to keep violating, in this case, with Isaiah Rodgers allegedly violating the policy, it's always the simple ones, it seems like, which is not betting on NFL games.
I mean, you blew me away at the 6th one there. Also, no fantasy football.
Yeah, so you can play fantasy football, but it has to be a season-long league where you make your picks for players and things like that before the season, and then you just kind of work with it throughout the season, and whatever happens, happens. But you cannot have daily fantasy football where basically you're changing your lineups, who's starting, who's sitting every week, because as we found out last week, and as we kind of knew, we just had to get it confirmed from the NFL, but the reps were saying players would obviously know who's going to play or who's not for the general public. So think of it like insider trading. You don't want to be able to give those players that advantage.
Yeah, I'm just imagining all kinds of different players being like, well, I'm sitting this week, so hold up. Let me just adjust because I definitely have myself on my roster. What does this mean? Does this mean Isaiah Rodgers? How long is Isaiah Rodgers going to be out? And how big of a loss is this going to be for the Colts?
So, again, this is based off of ESPN and Adam Schefter's report that Isaiah Rodgers would potentially miss the upcoming season along with a handful of other players. And I think for them, it's consistent with what we've seen in the past. Calvin Ridley, a wide receiver now with the Jaguars. He was previously with the Falcons. He bet on NFL games while he was injured. He got a years-long suspension. They've had players this season, just recently, actually, in April, that the NFL came down on pretty hard. Lions safety C.J. Moore, wide receiver Quintez Cephas, and then also Commanders defensive lineman Shaka Toney. Those three guys also are suspended indefinitely and are going to be gone for at least this upcoming season with betting on NFL games. So I think that with the punishment, it's just going to continue to come down hard, and the NFL hopes that it gets through to some of these players, because I think when Calvin Ridley got suspended in 2022 and missed an entire season, lost $11 million, people thought that that would wake everyone else up. But obviously this problem continues to persist, and as the NFL is just going to continue to try to make examples of people so that they can kind of nip this in the bud.
I guess the question is, like, I mean, sports betting is, we had that quote at the beginning, like the game has changed and it's just getting bigger and bigger, more accessible for everyone. How does the league, other than send in very clear messages, how do they enforce these rules?
That's the money question right there. I think a lot of it has to do with the education of the rules, because, for example, it says you can't enter a sports book during the season. Do all of them know what a sports book is? Seriously. I think if you asked every NFL player what a sports book is, some of them will probably bring up an autobiography about Muhammad Ali or something. So they would not know that it means, no, you can't go into this gambling facility. So there's part of it. But I also think that the NFL is kind of playing both sides of it. They've gotten in bed with these, DraftKings, FanDuel, and Caesars Entertainment as far as making money off of this, because it's a huge market. So I kind of feel like you made your own bed, and at the same time, you have to deal with what you've made for yourself. So they're playing both sides of it. They don't want players to get involved with it, obviously, but they've sort of opened Pandora's box in a sense, and they're trying to put everything back into it, but it's too late. And now I think we're coming up in an era where players have to become more educated, and really the NFL has to understand how prevalent it is. I mean, if you look back to just 4 or 5 years ago, sports betting wasn't even legal, nationwide, but now in almost every state you can do it. So there's going to be more of it. So the education has to be there, but also it's a bit two-faced by the NFL, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, people were still like playing each other Madden while they were themselves, and now they get to, have to avoid this whole new world that's growing up all around them. James Boyd, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me.
And an IRS whistleblower is questioning whether President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, got preferential treatment during a federal criminal investigation that lasted for years. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez takes a closer look.
Tonight, President Biden is emphatically denying he was present when his son Hunter allegedly texted a Chinese business partner in 2017 demanding payment.
Were you involved? No, I wasn't. Were you? No.
IRS supervisory agent Gary Shapley, now a whistleblower, told lawmakers he obtained WhatsApp messages he says were sent by Hunter Biden. He says Hunter Biden used his father as leverage to pressure a Chinese businessman into paying him. Quote, "I'm sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled," adding, "You will regret not following my direction."
If this was any other person, they likely would have already served their sentence.
Shapley alleges that the DOJ provided preferential treatment and slow-walked the investigation into Hunter Biden, saying Justice Department prosecutors prevented him from looking into the messages. He also alleges the federal prosecutor overseeing the case, Trump-appointed Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss, told at least 6 witnesses last year, I'm not the deciding official on whether charges are filed, and that Weiss said a Biden-appointed U.S. attorney had rejected his request to file additional charges. Hunter Biden recently reached a plea deal with Weiss for misdemeanor tax charges, resulting in no prison time. Attorney General Merrick Garland has denied interfering with Weiss's investigation.
He would be given full authority to decide the matter as he decided was appropriate, and that's what he's done.
Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much. And tonight we're hearing from a lawyer who is suing a so-called crisis pregnancy center. These are organizations that try to push pregnant women not to have abortions, and they aren't only in states where abortion access is restricted since the overturning of Roe v. Wade more than a year ago. Even in Massachusetts, a deep blue state, this abortion rights group estimates those crisis centers outnumber clinics 3 to 1. Ali Vitale has more.
Tonight, a lawyer speaking out about what her client allegedly experienced at a so-called crisis pregnancy center in Massachusetts. Attorney Shannon Liss Reardon accusing the Clearway Clinic in Worcester of a misdiagnosis of her client's pregnancy, telling her the pregnancy was viable when really it was potentially life-threatening.
If proper medical care had been provided when she went to Clearway, the pregnancy should have been terminated right then.
Liss Reardon says it all started for her client, who has asked to remain anonymous, after a positive at-home pregnancy test. The woman searched online for a safe medical examination to quickly verify the test result. That search led her to the nearby Clearway Clinic. There, they allegedly performed an ultrasound, concluding her pregnancy was healthy. But a month later, her lawyer says, the expecting mother was rushed to the ER with severe abdominal pain.
She had to have emergency traumatic surgery, which led to the loss of one of her fallopian tubes.
The woman's pregnancy was actually ectopic. Her fertilized egg grew outside of the uterus, according to the suit. It's a rare condition, only 1 to 2% of U.S. pregnancies per the CDC, but serious, even deadly if left untreated.
You can have rupture of the fallopian tube, which can cause dangerous and life-threatening internal bleeding.
And in the case of Liss Reardon's client, should have been spotted earlier if the exam was done correctly.
With appropriate training and an ultrasound that is performed correctly, there really shouldn't be any mistaking a viable intrauterine pregnancy from an ectopic pregnancy.
One of the reasons it wasn't, the case now charges, is because the Clearway Clinic's central focus wasn't on the woman's health, but on ensuring she kept her pregnancy, the goal of so-called crisis pregnancy centers like this one.
They also very interestingly and concertedly focused on trying to convince her to keep her pregnancy going.
These spaces present themselves as reproductive health care providers and come up in searches like the one this woman did. But they're actually focused on stopping women from getting abortions, according to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They've been a long-term and widespread barrier for pregnant women seeking medical information and care.
No fight, no freedom.
But the dangers are seen anew now after the Supreme Court did away with abortion protections last year. There are around 4,000 operations like Clearway running across the U.S. per Planned Parenthood. In a statement to NBC News, Clearway's executive director, Jill Jorgensen, said in part, "We cannot speak as to any individual's medical claims or history due to HIPAA regulations. Clearway Clinic has served more than 10,000 women and their families for the past 22 years and have never had a complaint like this." Liss Reardon says she hopes the suit will force Clearway to stop advertising itself as providing standard medical care and says her client is brave for coming forward.
Unless there's some legal action, there's not going to be anything to stop these clinics from continuing their pattern of deception and misinformation.
No justice! No peace!
Another battlefront in the fight over reproductive care following the overturning of Roe versus Wade more than a year ago.
Ali Vitale, thanks so much. After the break, cars burned on the streets and over 30 people arrested. People in towns across Paris are protesting the death of a 17-year-old shot by police. All that is just ahead, so stay tuned. And now for a look around the world in 80 seconds. A Ukrainian man is under arrest after authorities say he helped the Russians plot a missile strike that killed at least 11 people. 61 others were hurt after that missile struck a popular pizza spot in eastern Ukraine last night. Now, the man is accused of filming the restaurant for the Russians, as well as letting them know it was a popular place. And off the coast of Canada, debris and what's presumed to be human remains from that doomed Titan sub were brought ashore today. All of the evidence will be shipped to the United States and looked at by the Marine Board of Investigation. All 5 people aboard the Titan were killed after it imploded last week. And actor Kevin Spacey appeared in a London courtroom today. He is facing dozens of charges that prosecutors say involve 4 men that allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013, including charges of sexual assault. Spacey pleaded not guilty to all those charges. And South Koreans woke up a year younger today. It happened after the country scrapped the so-called Korean age. Now, under that system, babies turn a year old on the day they're born. Now they're going to go by their international age, which is the system we use here, which starts at 0. And violence and unrest erupted in Paris today after a police officer shot a 17-year-old delivery driver. Now, a bystander caught the incident on camera, and you can see here 2 officers are on the driver's side of the car. As it pulls away, one of the officers shoots at it. The car crashes soon after that, and the driver was struck by a bullet and died at the scene. So far, dozens of people have been injured and arrested. NBC's Matt Bradley has more.
Yeah, Gadi, some really dangerous protests in Paris and around the country last night. This was because of an incident that occurred in Nanterre just a couple of days ago. A young man, 17 years old, was shot dead by police. Now, this has sparked nationwide protests, and we're probably going to be seeing more, probably quite violent, tonight as well. Now, some of the anger about this will be familiar to our viewers in the United States. Now, what we saw was this man was shot dead. The police then came out and said that he was at a checkpoint. He had run his car into the checkpoint, and the police fired at him in order to save their own lives. Now, this was something that came out in French media based on anonymous sources within the police. After that, though, video came out, and that showed that that version of events wasn't really true at all. It showed that the car that was driven by Nail, this 17-year-old young man, that it was parked and that the police actually were holding their guns and seemed to be speaking to him and then shot him at point-blank range. Now, this is something that has caused a lot of anger. As I mentioned, lawyers for the victim or for the victim's family have said that they want this police officer to be charged not with manslaughter, which is what he's under investigation for right now, but with intentional murder. That's one of the demands they have. But this is also part of a broader issue about policing in France. There were 13 such incidents at police checkpoints last year, 1 so far this year. This in a country where there isn't a lot of gun violence and really not as many police killings, not nearly as many as there are in the United States. And a lot of folks are pointing out that a lot of these victims at police checkpoints are men of color, normally of African or Middle Eastern origin. And that has risen a lot of accusations and parroted today by athletes and other famous French celebrities that these men are pointed out, that they are the victims of racism. And that's one of the reasons why we're likely to see more really desperate violence tonight, not just in the suburbs of Paris, but likely all throughout France. Gadi.
Matt Bradley, thanks so much. And tonight we have an NBC News exclusive into what could be considered a war crime. They are Ukraine's stolen children, and these are allegations that kids have been forced from their families by Russian forces. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter talked to one Ukrainian mother about her desperate and daring attempt to find her son and get him home.
In a video posted by pro-Russian media, Ukrainian mother Oksana Stitsenko is seen getting off the train in southwestern Russia. The Russian reporter narrates Oksana's son Nikita was taken from the Ukrainian village of Kupiansk to a safe place by the Russian military, he says. Now he's being handed back to his mother. But what the reporter doesn't say is 12-year-old Nikita was kept for 8 months at a school in Russian-occupied Luhansk without his mother's knowledge. Oksana says she had no idea if her son was alive. They took our children, she told us just days after that reunion. They have no right to keep them there. The official Russian narrative depicts the Russian state as savior. We take children out of the conflict zone, saving their lives, President Putin said last week. And the face of the Russian operation is Commissioner for Child Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. Back in March, the International Criminal Court accused both Lvova-Belova and Putin of alleged war crimes, of the unlawful deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children. President Zelensky says more than 200,000 Ukrainian kids have been deported to Russia and Russian-occupied territory. The Ukrainian government says at least 370 have been brought back, including Nikita. The NGO Save Ukraine, headed by Mykola Kuleba, organized Oksana's daring trip, 3,000 miles all the way into Russia to bring home her son.
They are not giving them back. We're taking them back.
Since the ICC arrest warrant, Kuleba says Russia is making it harder.
Russians understand now that each case is valued for ICC, for Ukrainian, for future court.
Each case could be evidence.
Each case, it's evidence of war crime.
On September 8th, Nikita says Russian troops took him and 12 classmates from their boarding school outside of Kharkiv, just 2 days before Ukrainian troops liberated the area. They were sent to the Paraval Special Correctional School in Russian-occupied Luhansk. NBC News found this picture of Nikita on the school's website. He says they sang the Russian national anthem, his classmates in uniforms with Russian Zs.
They're Ukrainian kids.
No, he says.
These kids aren't Ukrainian anymore?
He says they're not Ukrainian anymore because they were grabbed. Ukrainian officials describing what they say is Putin's plan to erase Ukrainian identity.
You never were the Ukrainians, because Ukrainian nation never exists like a nation. You all time were Russians.
Were you scared to go into Russia?
Oksana says it was terrifying going into Russia. I was shaking at every border crossing. But it wasn't even a question, she says. Unless you're a mother, you can't understand. In a statement to NBC News, Lvova Belova says Russia has always helped and continues to help families be united. But Oksana is clear. No Russian official, no one from the Paraval school ever got in touch. I cried at night, she says. The pillow was covered in tears. I had no idea how to get him back. Molly Hunter, NBC News, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Can't imagine. Molly Hunter, thanks so much. Before we go, it is time for the best of us. Incredible people doing incredible things. Getting into college is hard enough. Keeping your grades up and still making time for extracurriculars, that's hard too. But these two twins didn't let the war in Ukraine keep them from their dreams. Their story is coming up next. Tonight, we want to introduce you to two brothers that just completed a major milestone over 4,000 miles away from their home. Meet Vlad and Yarek, two twin brothers that fled the war in Ukraine last year with their mom, and now in a new country surrounded by all new people, they are paving their way to a bright future. Like a lot of high school graduates, brothers Vlad and Yarek can't wait to go to college this fall. But getting to this point was not easy. The twin brothers are refugees of the war in Ukraine.
Mama, Papa.
The boys escaped to Poland with their older brother, leaving their mom, dad, grandparents, and friends behind.
We woke up at 4 a.m., I believe, from our mom's call saying the war started, guys. Yeah, and you cannot come back, you know. It was like hard to understand, you know, that your life will be really different than before.
Vlad and Yarek stayed in Poland for nearly 5 months, waiting without school, friends, or family.
I thought maybe I can, we can stay in Poland, maybe, then find a job or whatever. And then there is news about United for Ukraine program, which allows you to work and live in the U.S. for 2 years. And we applied like maybe 2 months after war started. Somebody sponsored us, and then we came here.
The boys and their mom have now been here for about 9 months. But no matter what country you're in, it's never easy being the new kid.
It was like a really hard time for us when, you know, nobody and you have no friends.
But over time, things seem to get a bit better.
And we even made a basketball team there.
Vlad and Yarek didn't have the right gear for basketball. They say their coach gave them brand new shoes right out of the box.
This is hard to understand, you know. The coach, like, you do not know this person before, you know, and he gave you a brand new shoes.
The boys even went to prom, but for them, it didn't really live up to the hype.
You never been to Ukrainian proms. That's what you really would dream about, you know?
Graduation, on the other hand.
Graduation was really, really impressive, right? There is a lot of students, they cap and gown. Many people, they filming you. It's a great experience.
And now, with help from their school, Vlad and Yarek are headed to college.
Well, there's also an opportunity for university with a full scholarship for us, and for 4 years. Yeah, really looking forward to that.
But even with all these new experiences, the war is always on their mind.
Our experience is not great, but other people have even worse experience as us. They could stay under missile attack right now, right, while we're talking. They need more support than us. So thank you to our military of Ukraine for risking their lives. And we will never forget how many lives it cost. Many people, civil people just died. We will never forget it.
And we can't wait to see what they do next. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.